One newspaper columnist describes the operation on the weekend, let's start with that if we may, Sir Ben, describes and praises its sheer brilliance and flawless execution. Would you agree with that? Morning.
From a purely military point of view, it was incredibly done. They planned it 7 months ago. They started the planning. I know that for a fact. So it's been long in the making. It's clearly been an option put to the politicians. And if you want to admire a military operation on its loan, then yes, it's an extraordinarily good operation. I don't quite agree with the Secretary of War who said only America could do it. A few other first-rate countries could do it, maybe not as neatly, maybe not with such zero casualty rates from the American side, but nevertheless, there are capabilities other countries could do. But this is an extraordinary operation, extremely successfully delivered. And from that point of view, from a military point of view, yes.
So that's your military hat, Sir Ben. Put your political hat on now as regards the operation on the weekend. Where do you stand on that?
I think overall we're in a very dangerous territory. In November last year, the United States published their national security strategy. And to be fair, it's on the front page or page 2. Very, very clear is a shift away from an America that was based in the rules-based system in the post-war structures towards a sphere of influence position. It views the Western Hemisphere, and your commentator in Washington was very clear by all the statements from the State Department, from others, that is now their view. And a hemisphere view of the world, e.g., we control the Western Hemisphere, it's our backyard. That's exactly the same as President Putin. That's not the same as how we function in Britain or Europe, or indeed until now NATO, but fundamentally that is a big shift. And that's a worry because Greenland is in the Western Hemisphere, which is Canada, America, South America, Central America, the Caribbean and Greenland. And also worrying for us is Greenland basically straddles the Western Hemisphere and our area, the European area. And that means it's perfect for Putin to use as a vehicle to try and break NATO.
Was it a breach of international law in your view?
I'm not a lawyer. I certainly think the first half of rendering Mandura to America, it's not something I bothered about. To me, I was always frustrated by people like Lord Hermer, who used to sue me all the time, and indeed sued Jack Straw in the last Labour government for rendition. The Americans have a different view, which is it doesn't matter how you get to a trial. The fact is America should be able to go to a country that doesn't allow it to, e.g., non-compliant country like Syria, and get those ISIS bombers and bring them back for trial. I used to be forced to kill people rather than bring them back to trial because my lawyers and the Lord Hermer likes would say, oh, no, you can't bring them against their will out of Syria for trial. They might be ISIS terrorists. And so the only option you couldn't send in special forces because that would be a detention, that would be a rendition. So that part I'm not so bothered about. What I'm really worried about is this whole sense of we're now going to run another sovereign state. That's what Putin does. That's Putin's justification for invading Ukraine. It will be no doubt his justification for invading other parts of Europe or NATO if he should wish to. That's a very, very dangerous precedent, and that's the bit we should all worry about. And if you notice at the beginning of this exercise or this operation, the State Department started off being at strains to say this is a law-abiding, this is bringing a guy back for trial, this is not anything else. 24 hours later, it's running another country.
Let's talk a little bit about Greenland towards the end of our conversation, if we can, Sir Ben. What line should Sir Keir Starmer be taking about these rumblings, these threats of Trump moving on that country?
Well, certainly not the headless chicken, rather pathetic line we had for the first half of yesterday. I don't know if you remember the junior ministers are out with the lines to take given to them by Number 10. They couldn't even say strongly they supported Denmark. They couldn't say on behalf of a prime minister. Now, I'm not off the same wing. I don't agree with a lot of his statements, but this is a man who came to power based on I'm a human rights lawyer. Lord Hermer was the one who sued me and my predecessors all the time. Couldn't even say whether they thought it was a breach of international law. And he had to be, it had to got out of him by your great correspondent, Natasha, that he supported Denmark. Denmark is part of NATO. It's an ally. Greenland has an American base on it, right? I mean, it's not like it's a non-compliant country. Venezuela had the IRGC from Iran active there. It had the Russian GRU active in it. It had the enemies of America sitting in it. not in Greenland, yet somehow America's sphere of influence, or the Trump White House, is growing. And I would totally agree with those reports that puts it at about 30% chance of the United States. You know, Corporal Vance went to visit it. If you remember the president, Corporal Vance, he went on a little jolly tour to Greenland.
Yes.
You know, I think they mean what they say.
Okay.
And it's time that we stood up, you know, to America about it. We don't have to pick a fight. We just have to be firm and clear.
Lastly, your former colleague Sir Jeremy Hunt told LBC last night he could actually see the end of NATO. If Trump were to move on Greenland, he could see that it could spell effectively the dismantling of NATO. Sir Ben?
I don't agree entirely with that. I think, of course, if America invaded a NATO country, you could see NATO without America, and that would leave a massive, massive hole that would need to be, should those remaining states agree to it, need to be filled with their assets and their forces. And America leaving NATO would account for about 65 to 70% of the forces, and they'd either just have to step up the plate. You know, one member leaves, but it would be a horrendous thing. Remember, NATO is really about our values rather than the individual tank battalions. It's really about we all are a common group of countries that agree in the same values. That's actually what Putin hates. That's what he hates about us. If America leaves, it leaves Europe much more vulnerable. We'll have to make up the military force if we can, and I'm sure we can, but it would take time. And in the meantime, Putin would have a free run.